Deep in the heart of the kingdom of Filard lies the city of Eltria, which has been a hotspot of adventurers for many years now. The city became attractive to thousands of warriors when a dungeon appeared inside it out of nowhere. Ever since then, adventurers from all over the world have been coming to the city to try their luck and test their skills inside this dark and scary place. In one of the shabby parts of this hustling and bustling metropolis, we find our young protagonist Istolfa, who is sitting in the street and trying to come up with a way to buy some food. It's clear from his appearance that he has been homeless for a while now, and he has been having a rather rough go at it. As his stomach begins to growl, he decides to go outside the city walls on a scavenger hunt, hoping to find something useful that he can sell to buy food. However, as he tries to exit the street, a group of thugs is laughing at him because they know that our boy will soon earn more money for them. These guys have a nasty habit of stealing his meager earnings, and they have been leeching off him for a while now. Even the people around town are starting to feel bad for our boy, who is having trouble even feeding himself because of his current circumstances in life. Some of these men have known Istolfa ever since he first came to Eltria after being kicked out of his home by his family. Everyone knows how hardworking our protagonist is, and they can't believe how he can keep on trying when things simply aren't getting better for him. On his way out of the city, Istolfa runs into one of the guards who recognizes him and even gives our boy a smile before asking where he's going. Our young protagonist says that he's just going to collect some herbs for the day, as it is pretty much his only way of earning some coins. Istolfa is saying goodbye to the guard when he accidentally bumps into an adventurer who seems to have a really bad temper. With a scowl on his face, he makes fun of our boy's appearance and even calls him a thief. He then grabs our protagonist by his shirt and decides to give him a beating, but this is when the guard intervenes and tells the adventurer to knock it off. At first, the city guard wants to send this foul adventurer away from Eltria, but he then notices a gold bracelet on the adventurer's arm. This is when the guard realizes that he's talking to a gold rank adventurer, and it would be stupid to go up against such a strong warrior. Still, the guard protects our protagonist and asks the adventurer and his companions to leave the boy alone and be on their way. As Istolfa tries to run away from these horrible men, he overhears the adventurer talking about testing his skill in the famous dungeon. This is when our protagonist wishes he had the skills to become an adventurer himself, because then he wouldn't have to work so hard just to find a piece of stale bread. He tries his best to forget about his early morning misadventures and starts collecting herbs in a nearby field. He hasn't eaten much in the last few days, and he's worried he might just faint because of his hunger. Unfortunately, these herbs aren't really edible, and our boy can't even go into the nearby forest to pick up nuts and berries because the woods are teeming with monsters, and Istolfa simply can't defend himself against those creatures. He knows that he might be able to go up against low-level monsters with the help of a weapon, but he just doesn't have any money to buy new gear. This basically means that our boy is stuck in his current situation until he makes some money. He is daydreaming about becoming an adventurer and starting a brand new life when suddenly he hears someone coming towards him. Istolfa quickly raises his head and notices a beautiful girl standing only a few feet in front of him. It's not hard for him to figure out that she is a light elf, and our protagonist is mesmerized by her beauty. She also seems like a top-tier adventurer since she is carrying such high-quality gear. Istolfa is trying to figure out just who she is when the elf asks him if he is knowledgeable about the herbs that can be found in this area. This is when our protagonist starts sharing all the knowledge he has acquired over the years, and the elf is simply amazed by how good he is at identifying different kinds of plants. She also learns from him that you need to meet up with the people from the guild if you want to learn how to identify different herbs, since those people always have the most accurate information. With this kind of information, you can always find the right plants and sell them to the people who might need them to earn some cash. However, with a rather heavy heart, Istolfa tells his new acquaintance that you don't earn nearly enough to justify all the effort you have to put in like these herbs in the first place. It's not a high-paying job, but that's all he can do right now because he doesn't have any gear, and he certainly doesn't have anyone he can ask for help. And to make matters worse, whatever he makes ends up getting stolen. He has to sleep outside, and you can't really make a fortune if you are sleeping in the middle of the street with all of your savings out in the open. The elf is intently listening to Istolfa's story, and just like any normal person, she feels bad for our boy who's been having a rough time even though he works so hard. She curses the humans for being so heartless before throwing something at our protagonist. Our boy immediately catches the mysterious object, and when he opens his fist, he can't believe that someone just handed him a gold coin worth at least 10,000 yen. Istolfa has become so distrustful of others that he's sure that she would want something big in return for this kind of money. That's exactly why he refuses to accept it. However, his new friend makes it clear that she is just giving him that coin as a payment for sharing information about the herbs and the merchant guild. While this seems like a fair deal to her, our protagonist is still not sure about taking such a high reward for doing pretty much nothing. He does accept it, however, when the elf puts her hand on his shoulder and tells him that she is giving him a chance to change his fate by handing him that coin. She says that that she loves hardworking people, so he should use that gold coin as well as he can and make the most of it. As soon as she says those words, Istolfa's mind starts running and he can immediately think of all the gear he can buy with this much money. If he gets even a short sword, he can definitely slay a couple of low-level monsters, and who knows, he might just end up becoming a dungeon hunter in a matter of days. With all of this running around inside his brain, our protagonist promises to make the best of this opportunity and thanks his new friend who introduces herself as Stella. She says that she hopes to meet him again as she starts walking towards the city gates, leaving behind our boy who has finally figured out that she is also a gold-ranked adventurer, and he promises to one day become as strong as her. Now that he has some money in his pocket, he immediately runs to a famous armory inside Eltria. The owner of the place is a man named Fleet, who knows our protagonist and has always been nice to him. Usually, the shopkeeper interacts with our boy whenever Istolfa decides to do some odd jobs for him, so it's a surprise for the man when he learns that today, our protagonist has come to his shop as a customer. When our boy shows Fleet the gold coin and asks for some gear, the shopkeeper gives him a huge smile. He says that Istolfa won't be able to afford armor with this much money, but he can definitely buy a sword and some other useful equipment if he really intends to become an adventurer. However, the first thing that our boy needs to do is to take a bath because he stinks, and according to the shopkeeper, an adventurer should always take care of his appearance. So Fleet asks his daughter to show our protagonist the bath while he finds the right gear for the boy. The little girl has also known Istolfa for a while now, and she says that her father has always worried about him. This comes as a surprise to our protagonist, who didn't think that anyone ever cared about his well-being. He quickly washes himself, and after the bath, goes up to meet with the shopkeeper, who is happy to see that Istolfa looks much better after cleaning himself up. Fleet then presents a short sword, some boots, a sack, and a new belt that he believes our boy can afford with the amount of money he currently has. He even offers to give our protagonist a free meal, and it's clear to Istolfa that the old man is giving him a great deal by selling so much equipment just for a single gold coin. No one has ever given him a favor, so he just asks Fleet why he's being so nice to him. This is when the shopkeeper opens the window and points towards all the thugs and criminals who are wasting their lives inside the shady streets of this metropolis. The old guy then goes on to explain that not everyone can work hard enough to improve their living situation, and he has always felt proud of Istolfa, who never stops working even when he is starving. So now that our 13-year-old protagonist is ready to change his life, Fleet feels an obligation to help him because guys like him don't come around every day. However, he says that he won't help anyone who comes to his shop with nothing to offer because that's not how the world works. After giving this explanation, Fleet offers a loaf of freshly baked bread to our protagonist, who takes just one bite and starts crying because it's been a really long time since he had actual bread. Most of the days, he just fills himself up by eating leftover food and weeds, so he has almost forgotten what good bread even tastes like. In a way, this is the first time he's feeling like a human being in a long while, and that's probably why he can't stop his tears. After finishing his meal, he quickly puts on all the gear, and Fleet even notices that with the sword around his waist, Istolfa is quickly starting to look like a fine adventurer. He's not wrong, because even our protagonist can see that he looks completely different, and he knows that it's all thanks to the goofy elf he ran into earlier today. As he leaves the shop, Fleet tells him to keep working hard until he becomes a top-tier adventurer, and even asks our boy to come back whenever he needs new gear. After waving them goodbye, Istolfa begins his journey as an adventurer, and his first goal is to make some money. He has already seen that by making good money, you can always earn respect and all the other basic necessities that you definitely need to lead a proper life. That's why he will have to keep working until he makes enough money to pay back the elf who saved him from a life of misery and hardship. He already knows where he can make that kind of money, and that's why he quickly starts running through the streets to make his way to the dungeon that has been attracting adventurers from all over the world. It's not long before he finds himself standing in front of a small opening that definitely leads to a dark and gloomy cave which is known as a dungeon. Outside the entrance, he runs into a guy named Nordy who has seen our boy collecting herbs outside the city. He's a seasoned adventurer, and he's really happy to learn that our protagonist is finally starting a new chapter in his life by becoming an adventurer. Like most nice people around the city, Nordy also feels for our boy and decides to teach him everything he knows about dungeons. Luckily, Istolfa isn't some ignorant kid, and he already knows that dungeons are considered magical places that lead to the deepest parts of this world. According to folktales, dungeons are considered lands of gods and evil monsters, so it's not a surprise when Nordy says that they're going to run into countless monsters as they step into this abyss. But the experienced adventurer also makes it clear that despite the dangers, a dungeon is really worth exploring because you can always get precious materials and other kinds of treasures in its depths. That's exactly why thousands upon thousands of adventurers rely on this place to make a living. After giving Istolfa a rundown of everything he knows about a dungeon, Nordy says goodbye and heads inside to start his own adventure. Meanwhile, our protagonist is stopped by a guard who tells our boy to not take any big risks since he doesn't have high-level equipment. However, the guard says that our boy can definitely make some quick money if he can find any magical stones inside the dungeon. He even goes as far as to tell our boy that he can find those stones in the cores, and our boy makes sure to remember this information. He doesn't know what a core is, but he's eager to find out more as he begins going down the stairs that take him to the deeper parts of the dungeon. He has always thought that a dungeon is dark and stuffy, so you can understand his shock when he soon comes across an open plain that's receiving a huge amount of sunlight and extends for miles and miles in every direction. After observing things for a while, Istolfa gets even more confused because he is definitely walking on real grass, and the sunlight seems way too real to be fake, but this doesn't make any sense because he knows he is currently many feet underground, so there should be no sunlight in this place. He's trying to figure out the situation he's in when he remembers that a dungeon is considered a mysterious place that's made up of magic. It's also very hard to find any information about what you're going to run into inside a dungeon, since that information is expensive and our boy never really had the money to acquire it. This basically means he's on his own, and he should not waste too much time trying to figure out the mysteries of this place. Right now, his goal is to find something useful, and that's why he needs to keep moving. However, even after running for a long time, he doesn't see anything but grassy fields in front of him. Istolfa is worried that he might lose his way inside the sea of green, and he is starting to think that he will need to find someone to get directions and more information about this place. As if on cue, someone appears right behind him, but unfortunately for our protagonist, it's not really an adventurer, it's actually a goblin, and this is the first time Istolfa has seen this monster. The creature hasn't noticed our boy just yet, and that's why it might be his best chance to take it out. So he grabs his sword and charges straight at the monster, hoping to eliminate it as soon as possible. However, he soon learns that this adventure isn't going to be as easy as he thought. As he tries to strike the goblin, it uses its wooden club to send Istolfa flying into the air. As far as our protagonist knows, a goblin is considered to be the lowest ranked monster, and he's surprised by the strength of this seemingly weak monster. It's clear that it won't be easy for him to take it out, but he doesn't have a choice at this point. He'll have to put down this goblin if he wants to continue his life as an adventurer, so he grabs his sword tightly in his hand and charges at the creature at lightning speed. This time around, he manages to dodge the wooden club and land a fatal strike on the goblin, causing the monster to fall down instantly. Istolfa has burnt quite a lot of energy in this short battle, but he still has to collect his bounty. He remembers that you can find magical stones near the core of monsters, so he decides to look for it. Unfortunately, the goblin isn't exactly dead and it tries to attack our boy, but someone shoots an arrow in its head, and this time around, the goblin perishes for good. Istolfa immediately starts looking around to find the person who just saved his life, and to his surprise, it's the same elf from earlier, and she looks pretty happy to see him exploring the cave. Our protagonist once again thanks her, this time for saving his life, but she says that she likes helping people even though most adventurers don't want her to get involved in their battles. Stella's really glad to see him working so hard and asks him if he's trying to explore the dungeon all by himself. Our boy says that he came here because he wanted to see her and thank her for what she did for him. This is when the elf reminds him that she didn't actually give him a lot of money. She says that he received such good gear in return for a single gold coin because he has always lived an honest life, and the people of this town want him to succeed. She's not wrong because the shop owner really did our boy a solid by giving him such good equipment for pretty much nothing. The two of them are talking when suddenly Istolfa notices that the goblin is not really lying on the ground anymore. He's afraid that the monster is still alive, but Stella tells him to calm down because the monster has disappeared because its time was up. She explains that inside the dungeon, the corpses of monsters don't really exist for too long, which means you have to harvest the magical stones as soon as possible. She's basically telling our boy that he has lost his first bounty, and this makes him a little depressed, but she tells him to cheer up because there'll be many chances for him to find those stones. She says that it's his first time inside the dungeon, so it's normal to make mistakes. All he needs to do is to keep learning from his experiences, and soon he'll be able to explore the cave as efficiently as possible. While the elf is trying her best to cheer him up, Istolfa still feels bad about messing up in front of his savior. He promises to do better next time, and before Stella can say goodbye to him, he starts running to find his next target. In his haste, he even forgets to notice that his friend was trying to tell him something. After running around for a while, Istolfa comes across another goblin, and this time around he doesn't act rashly. Instead, he stalks the monster like a predator and takes it out with just a single well-timed strike. He even surprises himself with how quickly he has finished off this goblin, and as a reward for being patient, he gets a magical stone, and our boy is simply hypnotized by this strange object. He's wondering what it can be used for because he already knows that it can sell for a lot of money. He decides to get as many stones as he can during his first visit to the dungeon, but before he even begins looking for another goblin, he notices that the corpse of the last one is gone as well. He had decided to not waste too much time on the mysteries of the dungeon, but he simply couldn't stop thinking about how the monsters appear and disappear inside this strange place. He still remembers how the last goblin appeared out of thin air, which means he can run into monsters anywhere inside the dungeon, so he has to be more careful. Unfortunately for him, this fear turns out to be correct, and another goblin just appears right behind him. This time around, the monster notices our boy before Istolfa senses its presence. That's exactly why it manages to launch a surprise attack on our protagonist, who barely manages to parry the blow. However, for some reason, this particular goblin is carrying a strange dagger that manages to crack our boy's sword. It doesn't take long for Istolfa to realize that he won't be able to win a straight-up battle against this particular monster, because his weapon is clearly inferior to the dagger in the goblin's hand. As soon as he figures out the situation, he decides to do something different and throws his sword straight at the monster. This weird move catches the goblin off guard and allows Istolfa to punch the monster in the face and knock it out. Our protagonist then proceeds to use that strange dagger to slay the goblin. However, in this battle, he ends up losing the short sword that Fleet made for him. It's badly cracked, and our boy knows that he won't be able to use it against any kind of enemy. He still has the goblin dagger in his hand, and he's hoping that it won't disappear along with the monster's body, but unfortunately, that's exactly what happens. As soon as the dagger disappears, Istolfa realizes that now he has no weapon, and he is standing in the middle of a dungeon where a monster can attack him from any direction at any time. He's in a bad spot and doesn't know what to do when suddenly he notices something shiny on the ground. He goes up to it to find out that it's another dagger, and this one also looks extremely sharp. Our protagonist is confused because he doesn't know how this weapon appeared out of nowhere. He knows that he didn't collect the magical stone from the dead body of the monster, and he wonders if other useful objects appear if you don't collect the magical stones. Still, right now he needs those stones because that's his only way of making money, and as far as he knows, having money is the only way to survive in this world. That's exactly why he starts walking around to find his broken sword, because he doesn't want to lose it. Lucky for him, a man brings the cracked sword to him and asks if it belongs to our boy. The man looks like an adventurer, and he seems like a nice guy, but there's something strange about him. Istolfa simply didn't hear him coming, and as far as he knows, this guy also appeared out of thin air just like monsters do. The adventurer also acknowledges this fact and says that he was here the whole time watching our boy fight that goblin. He also goes on to give our boy some very useful information about the landscape around him. He explains that monsters don't just appear out of thin air. In fact, they are actually hidden by a strange phenomenon of the dungeon known as the blinding grassland. The same effect also hides other adventurers, so you shouldn't just trust your eyes while walking around this place. This information gives our protagonist a much better understanding of this place, and he decides to ask the nice adventurer some more questions. He wants to know how this new dagger appeared in front of him, and the adventurer says that sometimes you can get a weapon after defeating a goblin scout. According to the man, this particular dagger can sell for as much as 30,000 yen, so Istolfa should take good care of it because it's quite expensive. Our boy is still wondering what he's going to do with so much money when the man hands him his cracked sword and tells him to be careful inside the dungeon because there are people who like taking advantage of novice adventurers. After hearing this, Istolfa says that so far people have only been nice to him, but this is when he first notices a strange sensation. Before he can even do anything, his body gets paralyzed and he falls to the ground. This is when the man tells him that he's actually not a nice guy, and our boy should never have trusted him. He also says that he has used a not-so-dangerous poison to paralyze our protagonist, and its effects usually aren't so dangerous. However, it's quite clear that Istolfa won't be able to move his body for quite a while. That's exactly why the man simply grabs our boy's new dagger and says that it belongs to him now. Our protagonist is, of course, sad about losing his first real treasure, but his sadness turns into complete hopelessness when the man says that he'll have to take out our boy to make sure he doesn't tell anyone about what happened here. With death staring him right in the face, Istolfa calls for help, but the adventurer makes it clear that no one will come here to rescue him, so it's no use at all. This evil man goes on to say that he feels bad for our protagonist, who has clearly been through some tough times, and unfortunately, even some good luck isn't able to save him from a sad and grim ending. While this sadistic criminal is enjoying tormenting his prey, Istolfa is begging God not to let him die like this when he can't even defend himself. He still has so many things he wants to do, and he simply can't die right after receiving the first opportunity to change his life. Luckily, it seems seems like God is listening because just before the criminals stab him, his hand gets chopped off by someone, and our protagonist soon learns that he once again is being saved by Stella, who seems out of breath. She looks positively mad at this evil criminal who is pinning her friend to the ground. When the man starts crying in pain, the elf walks up to our boy and tells him to hold tight while she deals with the monster who did this to him. With a smile on her face, she walks up to the criminal and tells him to stop crying because no one is going to come here and help him. After giving him a taste of his own medicine, she uses a spell just to knock him out. She then walks back to Istolfa and removes his paralysis with another magic spell. Our boy once again starts crying, but this time around these are tears of joy as he thanks Stella for saving him yet again. The elf can understand his emotions because he was facing certain death only moments ago, so she takes him in her arms and holds him there until he calms down. She then tells him that she has been following him ever since he ran off earlier. She was worried that he might get into some kind of trouble, and clearly she was right. While our boy is feeling stupid about running away from her, she offers him her hand and asks him to follow her since they need to get out of this dungeon. She also says that she wants to talk to him about something, so he should probably follow her to her hotel. That's exactly why Istolfa finds himself sitting inside a beautiful room that very evening. He's looking around like a lost child when the elf brings him a cup of hot milk. She says that she brought him to her suite because she wanted to talk about something serious and she couldn't do it in a public place. Of course, this statement intrigues our protagonist, who wants to know what Stella has on her mind. He's wondering if she's going to ask for a favor, and he is more than happy to help her. But to his surprise, she wants something completely different. With a rather serious look on her face, the elf asks our boy if he would like to be her husband. This question, of course, catches our protagonist off guard, and he doesn't even know what to say or make of this. After confirming that she's really talking about becoming his wife, he wants to know why she chose him out of all the people in this world. This is when Stella gets up and grabs his hand before telling him that he is extremely special. She says that she has heard about the kind of life he has had in this city, and usually such circumstances can really send someone into a dark place. But it's quite clear that Istolfa is anything but dark. Even after going through so much, he has managed to maintain his dignity and his humility. She also has fallen in love with his habit of working hard no matter the circumstances, so in her mind, he is exactly the kind of guy she's been looking for. While she's not wrong about his personality, Istolfa quickly has to remind her that he's only 13 and she can definitely find a more experienced husband for herself. However, this is when Stella finally decides to share something very important with him. She shows him that she can use magic, and like most elves, she has a very high amount of mana. While this makes her extremely impressive in battle, it also makes it pretty much impossible for her to have children with another elf. That's exactly why elves have to find someone with a low amount of mana if they want to get married and bear children. Istolfa has never heard about it, but from the tone of her voice, it's clear that she's not pulling his leg. He keeps on listening intently as she explains that after observing our boy, she has come to the conclusion that he has 0 mana in his body. This basically means our boy can pretty much never use magic, and this information hits Istolfa really hard. He knows that you have to be able to use basic spells if you want to survive inside the dungeon, so someone like him will find it pretty much impossible to stay alive. This realization makes him pretty sad because his career as an adventurer once again looks like a short one. This is when Stella puts her hand on his head and tells him to not worry about it too much because this might be a blessing in disguise. She explains that for most people, their mana goes up whenever they defeat a monster, but someone like Istolfa doesn't have any mana in the first place, so it can increase. This means that his physical strength will likely go up whenever he defeats an enemy, and that's actually not a bad thing at all. In fact, if he keeps on getting stronger and stronger, pretty soon physically, he'll be able to take down even the strongest of adventurers. This means that there is still hope for him to become a first-class adventurer, so he shouldn't just give up on chasing his dreams. She also promises to teach him the ways to becoming a high-ranking adventurer, and Istolfa knows that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, in return, he'll have to accept her as his wife, and of course anyone will take this deal without even thinking about it. However, our boy knows that currently he can't even defend Stella, so it would not make sense for him to become her husband. That's exactly why he tells her that he doesn't think he is ready to marry her just yet, but he would still love to be her student because he knows he can learn a lot from her. His answer once again surprises the elf, who is used to seeing men fall for her immediately. She understands his reasoning and says that she'll be happy to become his teacher, and who knows, he might end up falling in love with her since she's always going to stay this young and beautiful. Istolfa promises to be the best student in the world and says that he won't ever let her down. Now that our protagonist has decided to tag along with her, Stella thinks they should go to the guild and register as a party since they will be adventuring together. And after that, she wants to find the shop where Istolfa bought that short sword. After making these plans, the two of them walk around town and eventually find the guild where they tell the receptionist that they'd like to form a party. The receptionist is a little hesitant to allow a newbie like Istolfa to form a party with a gold-ranked adventurer, but he changes his mind after seeing the magical stone that our boy harvested in the dungeon. Since he managed to take down multiple goblins, it's clear that he has the potential to survive in that harsh place, and he definitely qualifies to being Stella's partner. The man asks our protagonist to sell him that magic stone and then gives him a bronze bracelet to signify his acceptance into the guild. This bracelet also shows that our boy is currently at the lowest rank, but he knows that he won't stay here for very long. After Istolfa signs a form, he officially becomes a member of the guild, and everyone inside the building applauds him for joining their ranks. Our protagonist has never really felt welcomed by so many accomplished people, and he starts blushing as he tries to hide his excitement. He thanks them profusely for being so nice and promises to do his best. Meanwhile, his new companions tell him to not be reckless and certainly not die while taking unnecessary risks. They seem like good men, and Istolfa is feeling great about finally becoming an adventurer. As he leaves the guild building with Stella, he asks her why she chose the word gladio to name their party. This is when the elf explains that the word means earth in her language, and she chose it because his hair is earth-colored, and this name perfectly suits them. Now that they have finished the guild business, Stella wants to visit the armory where Istolfa bought his equipment earlier that day. After that, she says that they should just go home and rest because they've had quite an exciting day. This last bit of information is a little sad for our boy. He simply wants to go back to the dungeon and practice some more because he wants to get strong as quickly as possible. He's thinking about all of this when suddenly he finds himself standing in front of Fleet's shop. The grumpy shop owner is happy to see our protagonist, but he is really suspicious of the elf who claims to be Istolfa's teacher. He thinks that Stella is just hanging around our boy because she likes using new adventurers like puppets. At first, the elf was hoping to tell Fleet about her plan of marrying our protagonist, but she just gets mad and blames him for selling her beloved apprentice a faulty weapon. The dwarf blacksmith, of course, gets mad after hearing this claim and asks to see this particular weapon, and that's when Istolfa brings out the cracked sword. The shop owner takes a good look at it and says that it must have been damaged by a special kind of weapon inside the dungeon. However, he also makes it clear that this kind of damage won't destroy the sword, and in fact, the weapon should repair itself over time as long as our boy keeps using it to break magic stones. Istolfa, of course, doesn't understand how this works, but this is when Stella chimes in. She says she had a hunch that this particular short sword was created by using dungeon steel. It's a particular kind of metal that can only be found inside the dungeon, and it's made up of mana, just like all the monsters you come across in that place. She has already told our protagonist about how you can increase your mana by defeating monsters. However, you can also make your weapon stronger as long as it is made up of dungeon steel. So in essence, Istolfa's cute little short sword will keep on improving as long as he keeps slaying monsters with it. It will also repair itself as long as the damage is small, and all of this makes it a really special weapon. It's clearly worth far more than a single gold coin, and our boy asks Fleet why he sold such an amazing sword for pretty much nothing. With a huge grin plastered on his face, the shopkeeper explains that he knew our boy didn't have the money to repair his gear, so he wanted to sell Istolfa a sword that doesn't require too much upkeep. He had made this short sword a while ago and wanted to give it to the right person, and he finally found that special adventurer when our boy came into his shop earlier today. As he explains his reasoning, Stella tells Istolfa that dwarves are pretty picky, so he should be glad that a grumpy guy like Fleet chose him to wield such a special weapon. The shopkeeper doesn't like this remark, but he also can't deny it since he really wants our protagonist to have this sword. The old man then asks Istolfa if he'd like to buy anything else now that he has some money on him. Judging by the damage to his sword, it's clear that our protagonist is still not a very efficient fighter, and he can definitely use some armor. But armor costs a lot, and currently, our boy doesn't really have that kind of money. This is when Stella tells him to sell that magical dagger he found inside the dungeon because he can't use it since you need mana to properly wield it. While her advice makes total sense, Istolfa is a little hesitant to sell his first bounty. Still, he knows that the elf is looking after him, so he decides to follow her advice and asks the dwarf shopkeeper to buy the dagger from him and sell him some armor. After buying whatever he needs, our boy once again decides to follow his teacher, who is mad at Fleet for being suspicious of her. Still, she admires the guy for being a good craftsman since he clearly created a special kind of armor for our protagonist. She also knows that the old man cares about our boy, and that's why he likes giving Istolfa free stuff even though he doesn't have to. Our protagonist is walking around town in his new armor feeling strong when suddenly he passes by the street where he has been sleeping for many years now. He can still see those thugs who used to steal from him, and despite all his gear, he feels powerless the moment he sees them. Stella notices his nervousness and tells him not to worry about them since they can't beat him anymore, but he should always try to be careful because these guys are sneaky and they might try something funny when he's not looking. She's not wrong, and our protagonist knows that he has to get strong enough so that no one ever bullies him again. That is exactly why he asks Stella to train him as much as she can, because he can't go back to his previous life. The sadness in his eyes is clear to his companion, who knows that our boy is under an immense amount of pressure. He has come pretty far from rock bottom, but he is still afraid of going back to that place, so his fear is completely justified. She feels bad for him and takes him in her arms and tells him to enjoy the moment without worrying about the future. She knows how much he has suffered over the years and says that he should go easy on himself and enjoy these little victories. After sharing these nuggets of wisdom, Stella asks our boy to follow her as the two of them make it back to her hotel. She wants him to rest because she knows that he hasn't been sleeping well for a while now. Luckily, he can get a good night's sleep in her suite, but unfortunately, there is only one bed here and there is no way that Istolfa is going to sleep next to her. He says that he'll be happy to sleep on the ground, but this doesn't sit well with his sensei, who wants him to be comfortable, so she just picks him up in her arms and takes him to the bedroom. After dropping him on the bed, she also gets under the sheets and says goodnight to him before falling asleep without a care in the world. While it's pretty clear that she doesn't mind sleeping with him, Istolfa is extremely nervous to have such a beautiful woman sleeping right next to him. However, his mind soon starts thinking about everything that has happened in the span of a single day. Only this morning he was trying to survive by collecting herbs, but now he is not only an adventurer, but also has a clear purpose in life. He knows that as long as he doesn't give up, he will keep getting stronger, so he promises to keep on trying his best. With that kind of positive attitude, he returns to the dungeon the very next morning, where the guard greets him with a smile. Now that he is in a party, Istolfa thinks that he'll be accompanied by Stella during this exploration, but she says that she'll stay behind and let him explore the dungeon on his own. She explains that she is way too strong, and if she goes along with him, he won't be able to learn anything. She wants him to deal with all the problems by himself, since that is the only way for him to learn, but she also wants him to be extremely careful. Our protagonist is a little hesitant to go alone into that dangerous place, but he agrees with his teacher and promises to be on his guard during the exploration. He wants to make her proud by getting strong, so he's not scared as he once again finds himself standing in the middle of the blinding grassland. This time around, he knows that he can run into a monster or a greedy adventurer at any moment, so he has to keep his eyes open at all times. This attitude proves to be useful because it allows him to fight off a goblin that spawns right behind him. Istolfa is a little surprised, but he quickly gets into a fighting stance and manages to take down the monster without too much problem. In fact, after slaying the goblin, he realizes that he has clearly gotten stronger because it was almost too easy for him to eliminate this particular goblin. He once again remembers what Stella told him earlier, and it seems like he really is getting stronger physically by taking out more and more enemies. Istolfa is thinking about all of this when he suddenly remembers what Fleet told him earlier. He quickly extracts the magical stone and breaks it with his cracked sword, and just like the shopkeeper said, the weapon gets repaired all on its own as soon as it's in contact with the magical stone. It's not fully repaired, but it's pretty clear to our boy that he can always take out more goblins to make sure that his weapon is in ideal condition. Now that he can slay a goblin without a problem, he is thinking about going up against more difficult enemies, but just then he remembers Stella's advice. She has asked him to take it slow, so he decides to not mess around with unknown monsters and keep going after normal goblins. He has to throw this plan out of the window, however, because the dungeon is an uncertain place and it's not long before he finds himself facing a much stronger enemy. It all begins when a boy wearing a magician's robe comes running towards our protagonist. The guy claims that he is being chased by a goblin magician, and he's not wrong, because in only a few moments a fireball comes flying towards the two of them and they have to move quickly to dodge it. This is when Istolfa notices a strange-looking goblin who's carrying a staff in its hand. The monster is using the staff to send fireballs in their direction, and our protagonist knows he has to close distance to finish it off. Luckily, he is pretty quick and he manages to reach this strange goblin and stab him in the chest before it can create any more fireballs. He's once again amazed by how strong he has gotten, and he quickly turns around to have a chat with the magician, but the guy tells Istolfa to look out because there is another goblin right behind him. This warning proves to be extremely useful because our protagonist barely manages to evade a very serious blow from a huge goblin. This monster carries an axe, and according to the young mage, it's known as the fighter goblin. It seems really strong, and it even manages to damage Istolfa's brand new armor. Our boy is of course mad at this monster, but he also knows that he can't fight it with the help of his short sword because it's already damaged and that axe looks mighty strong. He asks the other adventurer to use some kind of spell to deal with this behemoth, but the dude says that none of his spells would work on this scary goblin. With no chance of help coming from his new companion, it becomes clear to Istolfa that he'll have to deal with the monster all by himself. This is not a very pleasant prospect, but he doesn't have a choice, so he starts thinking about a plan to deal with this enemy. He knows that he cannot block that axe with his sword, which means he will have to avoid it somehow while he tries to close the distance between himself and the goblin. He shares this idea with the other adventurer who likes Istolfa's wild plan and promises to support him by distracting the monster with his magic. He says that his fire magic can momentarily blind the goblin and it might be our protagonist's best chance to land a decisive blow. While his plan makes sense, Istolfa is not sure if he can even trust this guy. His recent experience hasn't given him a lot of confidence and he doesn't want to risk his life by trusting a stranger. However, he doesn't really have a choice because he'll have to take out the huge goblin, so he gets ready for a fight while the other adventurer uses a spell to send some flames towards the monster. The flames distract the goblin and it loses sight of Istolfa, who manages to get behind it without much trouble. He then uses his sword to land a fatal blow on the monster, and to his surprise, the goblin dies pretty quickly. Both boys are shocked by what exactly happened since they weren't expecting to win this battle so quickly. The mage is especially surprised by how good Istolfa is with that sword, and he even allows our boy to take both stones. Our protagonist doesn't waste this chance and grabs the bigger stone and stabs it with his sword to repair it fully. It now looks completely brand new, and Istolfa knows that he'll be able to use it without much problem from now on. After collecting his bounty, our boy decides to continue his exploration, so he says goodbye to the other adventurer, but the guy stops our protagonist before introducing himself as Kyle. After learning that Istolfa is also trying to get stronger by taking out as many goblins as he can, the magician offers to be his teammate on this little exploration. He says that the two of them can certainly take out more monsters and they can even look out for each other. While his idea is not bad, our protagonist is hesitant to team up with someone else when he is already in a party. He tries to explain it to Kyle, but the guy is begging Istolfa to let him tag along. He says that he also wants to get stronger and improve his magic, but he hasn't been able to take down even a single goblin so far. He knows that he won't be able to survive on his own, and that's why he wants to team up with someone like our protagonist who can handle himself in a fight. He even offers to let Istolfa keep all the loot because he just wants to test his magic and collect mana. While our boy is still hesitant to work together with the stranger, he can't really say no to such an offer, so he decides to let this goofy magician accompany him on his exploration. Besides, he's also figured out that even though Kyle is a little weird, he clearly isn't a bad egg and it won't hurt to make new friends while you're trying to get strong. However, even though he has decided to team up with the magician, he isn't exactly comfortable working with a stranger. He's acting really nervously and he keeps saying that Kyle should find a more experienced adventurer to team up with. This is when Istolfa's new companion asks him to stop being so jittery and treat him just like a friend. They are pretty much the same age and they're both new to this profession. Despite his oddball nature, the magician seems to have a lot of riz, and pretty soon he manages to make our protagonist comfortable around him. He then explains that he doesn't want to team up with an experienced adventurer because he is not strong enough to accompany a veteran. Besides, he is more than happy to tag along with Istolfa since he knows that our boy can definitely take out most of the monsters that they will come across on the first floor of the dungeon. As a show of good faith, Kyle also decides to share the information he has collected about the grassland. He explains that on this floor they are most likely going to run into goblins, and on rare occasions they will have to fight against the pair of a goblin magician and a goblin fighter, just like they did earlier. However, according to his information, there are even scarier monsters roaming around these grasslands, and one of these creatures attacks them while they're still talking. The boys manage to get away from this monster, which looks like a wolf, and Kyle says that it's much stronger than a normal goblin. To make things worse, this monster has a habit of calling his friends and attacking adventurers in large groups. He says that they should exterminate it before it can call other wolves, but they are too late and the monster starts howling. By this point, Istolfa is beginning to understand that they are in a bad spot, so he grabs Kyle and drags him along as the two of them run far away from that place. Our protagonist knows that neither of them is strong enough to go up against a pack of wolves, so he's trying to run away from a fight, even though he doesn't like it. After running for a few miles, they decide to take a breather, and this is when Kyle thanks Istolfa for using his brain and getting them out of that tricky situation. He says that even though he can use magic, he can't really fight off multiple attackers, and he certainly wouldn't have been smart enough to run away from that situation. That's exactly why he wanted to tag along with our protagonist, and so far his decision has proven to be correct. Kyle is saying that he doesn't want to die before reaching his goal, and this sentiment reminds Istolfa of himself. This is why he asks his new friend why he wants to become a strong mage in the first place. The young magician is a little surprised by this question, but he decides to answer it because he doesn't want to hide his intentions from his new friend. He explains that he doesn't have the strength or sword skills to fight off monsters, but he does have a very good understanding of magic. In fact, some might even call him a prodigy because he can use high-level magic at a very young age. But unfortunately for him, he doesn't have the mana to use most of these strong spells, and that's exactly why he hasn't been able to take down even a single measly goblin. People have always made fun of him for having such little mana, and they also tease him by calling him a toy mage. This is exactly why he decided to explore the dungeon, since he knows that he can get more mana by defeating more monsters. He wants to get strong enough so that no one can ever make fun of him again. Kyle then asks our protagonist about his reasoning for getting stronger. Istolfa answers this question by saying that he doesn't really have a reason for coming here. Instead, he just wants to get strong because he wants to become a top adventurer. He then asks his new companion about what they should do next, but their conversation is interrupted when a wolf tries to attack Kyle from behind. Istolfa manages to protect his new friend, but he now has to face off against this vicious monster that's trying to eat them alive. According to the magician, there are only about 10 wolves on this floor, which means it is likely the same one they saw earlier, and they can't really keep running away from it. That's exactly why Istolfa decides to deal with it right here and right now, but the wolf is too fast and he isn't able to hit it with his sword. After missing the mark a couple of times, he finds himself in a tricky situation where the wolf is trying to eat his leg. He likely would have lost a limb if he didn't have such great armor, but he can't really let things go on like this anymore. Lucky for him, the mage is able to use fire magic to push the wolf away from his friend. However, even Kyle knows that they have to find a way to deal with this threat because they can't outrun it. But this is easier said than done because so far, Istolfa hasn't been able to hit it even once. It's easy for him to stab the goblins who are big and move pretty slowly, but this wolf is much smaller and it is extremely agile, which is exactly why our protagonist is having trouble dealing with it. However, instead of using brute force, he decides to use his brain and asks Kyle to help him with his magic. Istolfa's friend doesn't understand how his magic can help, but our protagonist has already noticed that the wolf doesn't like going near the fire that his friend can produce at will. That's exactly why he asks Kyle to use the fire magic to distract the wolf. He then uses his speed to get close to the monster and utilizes his armor to stay away from its sharp teeth. After finding an opening, Istolfa manages to grab the wolf and he throws it away like a doll to knock it out. He then slams it on the ground a couple of more times before using his sword to put the monster out of its misery. Kyle can't believe what he has just witnessed. He knew that our protagonist was strong, but he never imagined Istolfa to take down a grassland wolf all by himself. It's becoming more and more apparent that our boy is getting stronger pretty quickly. He is not only gaining physical strength, but he's also learning new techniques to fight off enemies. For instance, he just learned how to use his armor to close the distance against quick monsters. While he's thinking about all the ways he can use his armor to gain an advantage, Kyle is talking about how unusual it is to run into 3 strong monsters in a single day. However, he says that they still haven't met the final boss of this level, which according to his information is an extremely strong monster that only appears when you decide to enter the next floor. So as long as they decide to keep exploring the grassland, Kyle believes they won't run into anything too dangerous. This is good news for our boy, who says that he desperately needs to find more stones because his life pretty much depends on getting them. After learning that his new friend is completely broke, the mage feels bad for Istolfa and tells him to take all the stones they find today. This offer only makes our protagonist more determined to keep exploring, and they keep on coming across more and more goblins as the day goes on. While our boy is harvesting magical stones, his companion is receiving a boost to his mana, but he still isn't able to take down a goblin all by himself. He says that even though his fire magic looks impressive, it isn't good enough because a proper mage can take down a low-level goblin with a single hit. He still isn't at that level yet, and that's why they have to keep getting stronger. Istolfa is more than happy to follow this plan, but as he decides to start walking again, he bumps into another adventurer and he immediately starts to figure out if this guy intends to harm them. However, he quickly becomes relaxed when the guy apologizes for startling him. He has a smile on his face as he explains that he's also hunting goblins, and Istolfa starts thinking that this new adventure is actually a nice guy. Kyle, on the other hand, doesn't share his opinion whatsoever and makes it clear that he doesn't want anything to do with that strange guy. His hostile attitude surprises our protagonist, who thought the magician was a rather chill dude. That's exactly why he asks his friend what's wrong when the stranger leaves them alone. This is when Kyle explains that he has a strong hunch that the guy he just ran into is not a good person. He also asks Istolfa to stop trusting anyone who greets him with a smile, because most evil men use their smiles to win your trust before betraying you. He is not wrong, and our boy has already experienced that kind of betrayal, so he doesn't really argue with his friend, who believes that there are humans inside the dungeons who are even scarier than the monsters. All of this makes Istolfa realize how naive he still is, and he decides to stay on his guard before thanking his friend for making a good decision. After running into the stranger, Kyle is not feeling comfortable about staying inside the dungeon, so he wants to end this exploration as soon as possible. But this is when both boys realize something rather concerning. They have been walking around for hours, and now neither of them remembers which direction they need to go to find the exit. To make matters worse, the blinding grassland hides everything after a certain distance, which means they won't even be able to see the exit unless they're standing close to it. After realizing that he's lost, Istolfa starts to freak out, but Kyle is once again calm and collected and says that they have two choices, and neither of them looks particularly enticing. He explains that they can try looking for an orb of return and use it to teleport out of the dungeon. According to his information, you can find this special orb by taking down a scout goblin, but those monsters are pretty rare, and there's a chance that they might not run into one even after searching for 4 hours. After figuring out that this plan might not work, the magician presents the next option. He knows that this floor looks like a big square, and the entrance is near one of the corners. This means that they have to find the wall and keep following it until they come across the door to the outside world. However, there's a problem with this plan as well. The two of them have already seen how big this floor really is, and it is going to take them a while to find the right corner and the entrance. So the two of them decide to keep looking for the wall and also for goblin scouts, because they might get lucky and find the special teleportation orb. On their journey, they also come across normal goblins, and this allows them to harvest more mana and magic stones. While fighting these enemies, Kyle notices that his friend seems to have a chip on his shoulder, so he decides to ask Istolfa why he feels that he has to prove himself. This is when our protagonist shares his tragic life story with his new friend and says that he has to get strong or he'll end up back in that scary alley with no future to look forward to. Kyle is of course horrified to learn everything that our boy has been through. He is finally beginning to understand why Istolfa is in such a hurry to get strong and why he looks so happy every time he finds one of those magical stones. Having lived a comfortable and luxurious life, the magician has never had to experience the hardships of this world. However, he has been dealing with his own demons as he feels completely abandoned by his family, since he doesn't have the mana to become a full-fledged mage. In his own way, he understands Istolfa's hunger for power, but he tells his friend to take the slower approach because it is very dangerous to run around like a headless chicken in a dangerous world like this one. Stella has told our protagonist something similar, and he's finally starting to understand that he shouldn't act recklessly. However, he says that he doesn't know what else he can do. This is when Kyle tells him to start relying on others, especially his friends, because no one can survive in this world on their own. He says that as long as they're together, he'll always be happy to support our protagonist with his magic, so Istolfa should rely on him more. Our boy is feeling strange after hearing this because he is still not used to receiving any kindness from others. Still, he can see that his new friend is willing to help him even in the most dangerous situations, and this makes him a little more hopeful about life. That's why he loudly exclaims that he feels much better now because a huge burden has been lifted from his shoulders. Istolfa then thanks his friend for the kind offer and says that he would love to know more about him as well. With this, the two boys decide to finally accept each other as friends, and they promise to stand by and help each other reach their goals. But for now, their biggest priority is to get out of this place, and luckily, it's not long before they find the wall. Now they have to decide which direction they have to go, because they can certainly make the job easier by choosing the right one, but there's also the possibility that they might choose the wrong direction and instead find themselves outside the entrance to the lower floor. If that happens, they will definitely have to fight off the floor guardian, and Kyle doesn't think that they are ready to face off against such a strong monster. Still, they have to make a decision, so they decide to walk left along the wall. After only walking for a short time, they come across an opening, and they both nervously try to figure out if it leads to the outside world or to the lower floor. In their hearts, they are hoping to find the staircase that can take them out of the dungeon, but unfortunately, the stairs seem to be going down, which means they have made the worst choice possible. They think about turning back, but it's too late and the guardian is already standing right behind them. They barely get a chance to dodge the huge axe that comes flying straight at them. This monster is really big, and Istolfa tries his best to fight it off, but his attacks aren't working because the monster has a really strong armor covering pretty much every inch of its body. Kyle's magic isn't doing much either, and the boys are now facing a really tricky problem. It doesn't take long for them to realize that they are definitely going to lose this fight, so their best chance might be to just run out of there. Running away also makes sense because the floor guardian has to protect the entrance to the lower floor so it can't really chase them across the grassland. With all of this in mind, the boys look for the best chance and make a run for it. By some miracle, they manage to avoid getting crushed by the axe and get out of the dark alleyway. However, as soon as they step back into the grassland, an arrow hits Istolfa in the arm. Luckily, it doesn't manage to penetrate his armor, but it is pretty clear that they are now facing different enemies. According to Kyle, they are now up against a goblin archer and a goblin swordsman, and according to his information, a goblin swordsman is a much better warrior than the goblin fighter they fought earlier. This basically means that Istolfa will have to show his skills as a swordsman in order to win this fight, and it soon becomes apparent to him that this particular goblin is extremely fast. To make matters worse, he also has to worry about the archer, which means he cannot fight the swordsman with full concentration. However, it looks like Kyle has found a way to deal with the archer by himself. He has noticed that the archer looks confused and doesn't know where to aim at, and he has come up with a plan to deal with this pesky enemy. So he tells Istolfa to focus on the swordsman and forget about everything else. While our boy is busy facing off against the swordsman goblin, his magician friend manages to smash the archer goblin's face with his staff. The monster is stunned by this savage attack and it doesn't know how to react, but Kyle doesn't give it a chance to retaliate and keeps hitting it in the head with his staff until it passes out. The other goblin is looking at all of this with a confused look on its face, and this allows Istolfa to land a surprise attack on this enemy. The goblin fights back and punches our protagonist in the face, but our boy is not hurt at all. In fact, he only gets angrier after receiving that punch and decides to bury this goblin once and for all. The boys are amazed at how well they work together and how easy it was for them to take down these two enemies. It's clear that they would have lost without each other, and at this moment, they are finally beginning to appreciate their friendship. Kyle says that he might not be able to defeat these low-level goblins with his magic, but he can definitely slap them around with his staff as long as he can get close to them. The two of them are praising each other for the way they fought when suddenly they notice that the goblin archer is already disappearing. They are worried about losing the other magical stone as well, so Istolfa quickly decides to harvest it. While he's busy removing the stone from the swordsman's corpse, Kyle is looking around when he comes across something that surprises him. He immediately calls for his friend and shows him that they have received an orb of return for taking out that archer. Now, this shouldn't be possible because according to official information, only the Goblin Scouts drop this teleportation orb. This means that they are the first people to find out something new about the dungeon, and they're excited to report it to the guild since it will give them a lot of recognition, and they might even become famous. Now that they have achieved so much during this single exploration, they feel content about going home. Luckily, they also have the orb, so they decide to leave for today and get some rest before thinking about going any deeper. Kyle has never really used this orb before, so he asks Istolfa to stay close because it will be really bad if our protagonist gets left behind. While the magician is busy casting the spell, our boy starts thinking about everything he has done so far today. Even though he didn't manage to go to a lower level of the dungeon, he ended up making a new friend who he can depend on as he tries to become a stronger adventurer. He's thinking about all of this when suddenly the orb begins working and they get blinded by a very strong light. Only moments later, Istolfa finds himself sitting in the street outside the dungeon while his friend is passed out on the ground. The guard near the entrance is amazed that these novice adventurers managed to find an orb of return. While he is praising them for hitting the jackpot on their first exploration, our protagonist asks his friend if he's okay. This is when he learns that Kyle isn't feeling too well, which is normal when you try to use a teleportation orb. After making sure that his friend isn't dying, Istolfa decides to visit the guild and present all the magic stones that he has gathered during his latest exploration. He has brought an interesting bounty, and the receptionist says that he will receive 48,000 yen for all these stones, which is a huge reward. However, this isn't the only thing that they have brought, and Kyle tells the receptionist that they would also like to sell some information about the Orb of Return. The boys know that information about the dungeon is pretty expensive, and they're hoping to make some big bucks by sharing what they have learned, but the receptionist shatters their hopes by saying that they can't buy this information. He explains that a lot of people bring in false information about all kinds of things that they have witnessed inside the dungeon, and the guild officials have decided to only accept the information if it is backed by a senior member of the guild. Since Istolfa and Kyle don't have any experience whatsoever, they can't really be trusted, and hence their information is not admissible. This of course sours the mood, but the boys are still happy with what they have earned so far. As they try to leave the guild, the receptionist warns them about going into the Artisan's Alley. He says that some criminal gangs have been roaming around that place, so it might be dangerous to go there so late in the day. The boys aren't initially too worried about running into some thugs, but as they enter this particular street, Kyle quickly realizes that they might have just entered a trap. There are no lights in this part of town, and it's pretty clear why low-level criminals use it to rob people who make the mistake of coming here. This night is no different, and it's not long before the boys are surrounded by a group of bandits. These men are carrying swords, and they ask our protagonist and his friend to give up whatever loot they have on them. This scene reminds Istolfa of all the times he got robbed by the people when he was sleeping in the streets. He doesn't want to go through that trauma anymore, but this time around he isn't alone. His friend tells him to calm down because he knows they'll be all right. After all, Istolfa isn't some weakling anymore. Today he took down some really strong monsters all by himself, so there is no reason for him to be scared of these seasonal criminals who don't even know how to use a sword. These words of encouragement remind our protagonist of his own strength, and he decides to never let anyone steal from him again. By this point, the criminals are getting impatient and they try to attack the boys to show how serious they are, but they have to step back when Kyle uses a spell to force them away from himself. He says that his magic isn't strong enough to take down a human, but it can seriously hurt these people, so they should be smart and stay far away from him. The criminals, however, aren't very smart and they only get angrier after being attacked by Kyle. One of them tries to sneak up behind Istolfa, but our boy is way too good with the sword to get outclassed by a nobody. He manages to parry the attack and then proceeds to push the guy away from him. The delinquent is surprised by the strength of this young boy and he tries his best to overpower our protagonist, but it's not going to work. Istolfa knows that he can never go back to his previous life, and this motivation is enough for him to fight back against anyone who tries to wrong him. Turning his anger into strength, he manages to take down the enemy without breaking a sweat. He then tells the guy to stop harassing him because he won't go easy on them anymore. The commitment in his words is resounding, and by this point, the delinquents have started realizing that they made a mistake. They are wondering what to do when they hear a group of city guards approaching them. They don't want to go to prison, so they try to make a run for it, but it looks like they won't be getting too far. While the criminals are trying to run for their lives, the leader of these guards approaches our boys and asks them if they're okay. Kyle is really mad at him for not patrolling this street when everyone knows that it is the hiding spot of criminal gangs. The guy feels bad and offers to escort Istolfa and his friend back to their hotel, but the magician says that they can find their own way home and they don't need any help. He is turning around to walk back to his hotel when he bumps into Stella, who looks really happy to see her apprentice. She is a little surprised to learn that our protagonist made a new friend on his first real exploration, and she seems to like Kyle, who clearly knows a lot about elves. Our magician boy, on the other hand, is not a fan of elves because he considers them cheaters who can use magic without spending too much effort on learning it. Stella, however, doesn't get mad at this young boy because she knows that he is talented and hardworking and says that he will become a really strong mage one day, as long as he keeps learning. This is a huge compliment coming from someone so strong, but Kyle only gets more annoyed after receiving some praise from an elf, and his attitude makes the elf adventurer smile. Istolfa interrupts them and asks his master if he can explore the dungeon with his new friend, and Stella says that it would be great because he might learn faster if he tries to explore it with a companion. In fact, she says that he can find as many teammates as he wants, and even asks Kyle to be nice to her beloved apprentice. Our protagonist is really happy that his sensei approves of his friend, and he thanks her for being so understanding. However, Stella hasn't just accepted the young magician for no reason. She knows that he is a prince who is fourth in line for the throne of the kingdom of Filard, and she also knows that he is known as the Toy Mage. In a way, he reminds the elf of her beloved Istolfa, and that's exactly why she thinks he is a great companion for her apprentice. The next morning, our protagonist is up pretty early, and he's walking around the room waiting to get back into the dungeon. His nervous actions wake up Stella, who finds his excitement to be adorable. She says that she is impressed by how far he has come in only a couple of days, and she is excited to see how much he will grow as a person, as well as an adventurer, as he continues to work hard. The two of them are talking when suddenly they hear knocking at the door. Istolfa quickly opens it to find Kyle, who says that they need to leave early today since they first have to visit the armory. Our protagonist doesn't want to argue with him, so he quickly gets his stuff and leaves, and Stella also decides to accompany the two of them. It doesn't take them long to reach Fleet's shop, where they tell the dwarf that they are the ones who took down the ruffians last night. The shopkeeper is amazed that these two kids managed to take down an entire gang, and he says that he's really proud of Istolfa for standing up to those criminals. However, it's clear to him that our protagonist has been in a lot of battles because his armor needs some serious repairs. He says that he can repair it pretty soon, but Kyle thinks that Fleet should show them something much sturdier than what Istolfa currently has. He explains that they plan to enter the second floor, which means they will have to go up against the floor guardian. Now they were able to fight off all kinds of goblins and the grassland wolf with the gear they currently have, but Istolfa's current armor won't protect him against the boss monster, so they need something better. Fleet is amazed after learning that our protagonist managed to take down so many strong monsters in the span of a single day. He hasn't seen anyone progress so quickly, and he's starting to understand why his precious customer really needs stronger armor. He asks Istolfa if he also thinks that he needs better gear, and our protagonist agrees with Kyle. He says that he managed to survive against some really strong attacks with the help of his current armor, but there were moments when he was facing serious danger and he couldn't really rely on the protective gear. So if he's going to fight stronger enemies, he definitely needs something sturdier, and currently he has a budget of around 50,000 yen. After hearing this, the blacksmith goes into his workshop to find the kind of armor that suits Istolfa's needs. The magician thinks that they should just buy some plate armor, but Stella doesn't think that's a good idea. She knows that our protagonist relies on his speed to fight, and plate armor is too heavy, not to mention extremely expensive and completely out of their budget. She believes that Istolfa needs the type of armor that suits his fast fighting style, and luckily Fleet has just what they're looking for. He brings out armor that's made from hard leather, and it's not just really strong but also pretty light. Even more importantly, Stella notices that it is made from the hide of a magic beast, which means it also has some kind of magical properties. Fleet is amazed by her keen observation and says that it really is made from a special magical material, and it can protect Istolfa from arrows fired by a goblin archer or a straight-up attack by a normal goblin. It's also really light, and it can keep our protagonist safe in most situations. While Fleet is singing praises of this hard leather armor, his daughter smacks him in the head and forces him to mention the shady history of this particular piece of equipment. Istolfa now really wants to know what kind of history this armor has, and the shopkeeper has no choice but to share it. He explains that this armor was commissioned for a child of a noble family, but the kid died before he could ever wear it. Because of this, rumors began circulating that this armor was cursed and the family refused to buy it. Ever since then, this armor has been sitting inside Fleet's shop because no one really wants to purchase a cursed object. Kyle immediately asks his friend to not buy something like that because curses can be really powerful and they don't want to deal with any unnecessary problems. Stella, on the other hand, thinks that this armor is perfect for our protagonist since she cannot detect any curse on it. As far as she can tell, it is just made from the hide of a magic beast and has some magical properties. After hearing this, Istolfa is thinking about buying this armor, but there's another problem, and it's the price. According to Fleet, he cannot sell it for anything less than 70 grand, and he only brought it out because he can reserve it for our protagonist until he makes enough money to afford it. This leaves our boy in a tough situation, and he doesn't know what to do. It's clear that he will be much better at handling stronger monsters if he has this armor, and Kyle agrees with it. He says that they don't have to go to the second floor today, so they can spend a couple of days making the money they need to buy it. As Istolfa tells the dwarf blacksmith to reserve the armor, the old man asks him if he really wants to wear something that might be cursed. It's clear that Fleet doesn't want to sell anything shady to our protagonist, and this makes Istolfa smile because at least someone is looking out for him. He says that he doesn't care about curses, and he wants to buy it because it looks to be of the highest quality, and it can keep him much safer against stronger monsters. Until he can afford this expensive armor, however, Fleet thinks he should just use his old armor after receiving some repairs, and he should also buy a small shield which will only set him back about 10,000 yen. Stella says the shield looks great on Istolfa, and it's clear that it will come in handy in battle. After getting the repairs done on his equipment, our boy is now ready to go back into the dungeon with his friend, but Kyle says that they still need to make another stop. Since the two of them are going to be adventuring together, they need to register as a party, and according to the young magician, they also need to find more members. They at least need someone who can use healing magic and support them while they try to take out the enemies. Stella likes this idea, and she gives them the green light to search for new members. While our duo is trying to find more people to join their team, a young boy enters Eltria to try his luck inside the dungeon. However, he is alone and doesn't want to go into that dark place all by himself, which is exactly why he is also looking for some potential party members. And to make things even spicier, he also happens to be an elf, and he is sure that his god will help him find the right companions. That evening, Istolfa and Kyle are running around the guild trying to recruit more members, but no one wants to join a party of a couple of novices. It's not long before Istolfa realizes that it will be downright impossible for them to find someone crazy enough to join their party. However, Kyle is still hopeful that they might run into someone who needs some offensive companions in their team. At that moment, our protagonist remembers that Stella offered to give them recommendations, but his friend told her not to, and now they have no one who wants to associate with them. He tells Kyle that maybe they should go back to his sensei and ask her to help them, but the magician believes that they won't find the right person if they ask the elf to help them. He says that he doesn't just want another adventurer in their party, he is looking for someone who can become their friend and who they can trust with their lives. He's actually making a really good point, and Istolfa is starting to see why Kyle is not taking any shortcuts while forming his party. Unfortunately, it looks like today they won't find any new companions, so they decide to go back to the dungeon and try to train their combat skills to prepare for the next part of their exploration. However, after reaching the entrance to the dungeon, they notice that someone is causing a huge commotion outside the door. They soon learn that the guard isn't letting a dark elf enter the dungeon, and this particular elf looks to be a priest. After getting turned around from the entrance, he starts walking back towards the city, and this is when he notices Istolfa and his friend. The elf immediately grabs our protagonist's hand and introduces himself as Duma before asking for his name. He says that he would love to explore the dungeon with them and promises to be extremely useful since he is pretty strong. It's clear that this guy is desperate and wants to enter the dungeon by any means necessary, and that's exactly why Kyle tells him to pump his brakes. He says that he isn't sure about allowing a stranger into their party, but the elf is that he can be of great use to them inside the dungeon so they have nothing to lose. Our magician is of course suspicious of this weird elf, but he agrees to let him accompany them at least until they enter the dungeon. Duma is over the moon when the guard finally allows him to go through the cave entrance. While the three of them are getting ready to enter the grassland, Kyle asks Istolfa if it is really a smart decision to hang out with a weird elf. However, our protagonist believes that Duma isn't a bad guy, and he also happens to be a healer, which means he is the perfect member for their party. So he asks his friend to just be on his guard and see if they can actually trust this dark elf. As soon as they reach the first floor, Duma begins to explain that he has been having quite a terrible luck at becoming an adventurer. He explains how a healer like him can't really enter the dungeon by himself, and to make matters worse, no one really wanted to join his party because people are scared of dark elves. Kyle, however, thinks that no one wants to join hands with this elf because of his weird and somewhat rude personality. This of course creates tension between the two of them, and Istolfa tries his best to make them calm down. Eventually, Duma says that now that he's inside the cave, he can explore it by himself and he'll leave if they don't want him around. So he thanks them and decides to go on his way, but just before he leaves, Kyle asks him to name which god he serves. Our protagonist is surprised by this question, and his friend explains that there are many gods in this world, and a priest only serves one of these gods. According to him, a priest receives a special ability depending on what kind of deity he serves, and that's why he wants to know the name of the god that Duma follows. He is especially intrigued because he thinks that their new friend uses some weird kind of magic, which means he serves a weird god. And judging by the elf's reaction, this assumption seems to be correct. The dark elf says that he uses a strength-enhancing magic, but he clearly is reluctant to talk about it. Kyle, however, is hell-bent on knowing it, while Istolfa doesn't want to force someone to talk about their past, especially because his own past is extremely painful. He says that everyone has a right to have some secrets, and they don't need to know everything about a person in order to be their friend. Since they clearly need a friend as their next party member, they should trust Duma and hope that he will share more about himself whenever he feels comfortable talking about it. For the first time ever, our protagonist is making a great argument, and Kyle has no choice but to apologize to the dark elf for being so rude. He says that he'll be happy to have Duma in their party, and this makes the elf really glad because that's all he really wanted. He thanks them for the generous offer and says that he'll reveal the name of his god as a sign of gratitude. This is when he mentions the name Neilchanter, who happens to be the god of dungeon arms. Kyle is astonished to hear this name because as far as he knows, this particular god gives you extreme combat skills. He is finally starting to realize that this dark elf can be really useful to them, and that's exactly why he asks Duma to support Istolfa during combat. Our boy is thinking that the god of dungeon arms must have some connection to weapons created from the material that you can find inside this place. However, he has to refocus his attention when their newest friend mentions something strange. The elf says that it's extremely weird that there aren't any monsters around, even though they have been here for a while now. He's not wrong, because only yesterday our protagonist and his magician friend had to deal with many goblins in this same area. Istolfa believes that there must be monsters around them, and they just aren't able to see those creatures because of the effect of the blinding grassland. He turns out to be absolutely correct because just then, a wolf appears right behind him and tries to attack him while his back is turned. His friends obviously see the threat, and Kyle tries to protect our protagonist, but Duma pushes them both aside and smashes the monster with his staff to take it out. He looks like an expert at close combat, and this surprises our boy and his magician friend. He asks them to stop looking so surprised because he has already told them that he is strong enough to handle himself against most monsters. However, this wasn't a clean victory, and he has hurt himself in the process, and he says that it all happened because he failed to do his duty. Istolfa doesn't understand what he's saying, and this is when Duma explains that our protagonist has to be their vanguard who receives support from the two of them, and as part of their duties, they will have to make sure that no enemy sneaks up on Istolfa even if they end up getting hurt in the process. Duma also makes it clear that even though he can take on a grassland wolf by himself, he certainly isn't accustomed to getting into a brawl, so our protagonist will have to deal with most of the enemies that they're going to come across as they try to go deeper into the dungeon. This of course puts a lot of pressure on Istolfa, who is already feeling nervous. He is especially worried because unlike the elf, Kyle can't even defend himself, which means he will always have to look after his magician friend. After learning about this, Duma starts teasing the magician for being pretty much useless, and the two of them start fighting like a couple of kids who simply don't know how to get along. Meanwhile, Istolfa starts to realize that his new companion is not only strong, but also pretty smart, and he says that he'll be happy to call the Dark Elf his friend. Now that they have officially decided to accept Duma into their party, our protagonist decides to share their objectives with their new friend. He explains how they are trying to make enough money to buy new armor for him since they're going to need it to venture into the lower floors of the dungeon. Duma actually agrees with their assessment because he too believes that Istolfa's current gear won't work against stronger monsters. He says that he'll be happy to help them explore the very depths of this dungeon because he also wants to get strong just like the two of them, and it's quite clear that they will level up much more quickly if they are working together. The Dark Elf is telling his two friends to rely on him when suddenly they hear some noise coming from behind them. They immediately get ready for battle, and it turns out they will be facing off against a goblin swordsman as well as a goblin fighter. Although they have defeated these monsters before, Istolfa knows that he can't make a single mistake against such strong creatures, but luckily, he won't be fighting them alone. This time around, he has another companion who promises to take care of the swordsman and asks our boy to focus his attention on the much stronger goblin fighter. Kyle, on the other hand, promises to help them with his magic, so they should just wait for the right opportunity and begin their assault whenever he creates an opening for them. And after making this plan, all three of them are ready to face off against these enemies like a team that looks polished and ready to take on any monster that might come their way. And this is how this segment of the manga ends. If you liked this story and want us to continue, please leave a comment down below with the name Kyle.